Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to what will be my ban list prediction video for the upcoming ban list. We don't know exactly when this is going to drop. A lot of people think the time is right around the corner, with YCS Niagara having just ended and Minneapolis being next on the slate. But it could be tomorrow, it could be a month from now, hell, it could be today before I get a chance to finish editing this, which would be unfortunate. But we're going to hope that it's not and jump into this. And before we do, I just want to ask you guys to please like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all new videos. Click the bell icon if you want to be notified when new videos are uploaded. And with that said, let's get into the video. Alright, so we are going to talk about the ban list, and I just want to put a couple of notes out there quick before we get started. This is going to be sort of my prediction video, not really a wish list video. I know when ban list season rolls around, it's typically a mix of people predicting things, people talking about wish lists that they want, and then maybe some extremely hot takes in one direction or another. I think you'll find that the community as a whole will never truly agree on most things, although there is a pretty loud consensus opinion on certain ones. Before we jump into the actual ban list predictions that I have, I thought it'd be cool to take a look at the OCG ban list, which was just instituted, or at least some of the hits. I'm not going to look at everything. I'm sure you guys have probably seen plenty of content on that at this point, but there were some notable hits, starting off with Wandering Griffin Rider, which was actually banned in the OCG, and this was a big hit, obviously, to the Adventurer package. That deck has seen a little bit less play in recent months here, with the release of Power of the Elements and decks like Sprite and Tier Elements kind of taking a larger role in the metagame, but Adventurer is still very good. It's a free resource engine, and Wandering Griffin Rider did allow them to end on a negate, meaning you could pretty much splash this into a lot of things and have a one-card Omni negate and free resources, so it's not shocking that they hit this. I don't think they'll follow suit with it here in the TCG, specifically because, A, they haven't really had a chance to reprint these cards yet, and by these cards, I mean, like, the core Adventurer cards, such as Water Enchantress and Rite of Aramesir, and, like I said, Adventure has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit, so it doesn't seem to me like this is going to be a move that we see on the immediate horizon, but I'm not necessarily shocked that the OCG made it. Now, Fluanderies and the Magnificent Map was another one that was hit, and I have to say this one's a little surprising. I think the Fluander/Flunder deck as a whole is really annoying to play against, but I don't think it's overly problematic. It's had some significant meta showings in both formats with OCG and TCG, and there is no doubt that Map is one of the best starter cards for it, but I'm a little bit surprised by the decision that they made to go ahead and limit that here, but it doesn't... I don't think it means much in terms of what impacts it might have on the TCG side. Like I said, Flunder has been a deck that has seen a lot of representation, but it's not, like, crazy represented, and it's not impossibly hard to beat. I think, if anything, you could see hits to something like Barrier Statue, but I don't even think that's the direction that they're going to go in. Either way, an interesting choice, and certainly one that I think had to do with the A, dominance of Flunder in the OCG for an extended period of time, and B, all of the other hits that they made would have buffed Flunder up quite a bit, and so it sort of makes sense that they're trying to level the playing field. Now, Primeval Planet Paralorino, I probably mispronounced that. This is the Tier Elements field, so this card was actually put to 1, and I think it's interesting because it's definitely one of the best cards that Tier Elements have access to, and Tier Elements have been dominating in Japan. There were multiple hits to the deck in the OCG, and I will talk about it when I get into my predictions in a moment, what hits I think we might see here. The deck has barely been out for a hot minute in the TCG side of things, so I don't think we're going to see anything drastic. This is a card that is pretty pricey and is not really even begun to scratch the surface of what it can do. We don't have the Ishizu cards yet over here. Those will be coming out in Magnificent Mavens. I just think you're not going to see a move like this for a little bit. If anything, maybe they semi-limit something, but I think it's been way too recent for Tier Elements to even be looked at as something to get hit on this side. Meanwhile, the deck was absolutely dominating in Japan. The Ishizu Tier Element build was probably the best deck in the format without question, so it doesn't shock me with this move. This is definitely a big hit to the deck, and they definitely did not pull any punches in terms of their hits to some of the top decks there. It should definitely shake up the meta moving forward. Lightning Storm was actually put to 2 in the OCG, which is interesting, but I think it's just because it's cited as such a staple card in almost everything to get over a lot of the heavy trap sort of problematic decks that play a bunch of back row. Japan likes to do this thing where they will just hit a bunch of cards that see a lot of play to 2 and not really like limit them or put any significant restrictions, but just sort of force people to play other things, maybe put them in 2 to keep them in check and decrease the consistency. I don't hate the move. It's just an interesting one, but again, I don't think it's necessary on this side, and I don't think it's going to happen. And Swap Frog was put to 1. This is a huge move because obviously one of the core components of the Sprite deck that allows the deck to function as well as it does. Swap Frog is at 3 here in the TCG, but I could definitely see it being one that gets some list attention depending on where things go. I think overall this, along with hits to Splight Jet and Splight Smashers in the OCG, is going to take Slight down a peg while not completely killing it, but it should be interesting to see what other moves they make. This is just, some of the more notable hits from the OCG side of things to give people who maybe weren't familiar or didn't see the list an idea of some of the hits and kind of have that comparison to ours. So with that being said, let us jump into my predictions, starting off with Forbidden. Now, for the Forbidden side of things, there are a lot of cards that people probably want to see banned, but honestly, for the most part, it's not going to happen. They typically keep bans light on this side, and realistically, I have 4 cards I think are possible hits. I don't even think that they're going to hit 2 out of those 4. We will have to see. Mystic Mine has obviously been a hot button issue in the community for a long time. You either love it or you hate it, and there's no doubt that it is a controversial / polarizing card that is inherently unbalanced, but also has some elements of balance to it because it keeps some of the combo decks in check, and that's the main argument in keeping it. But I think at this point, with the player outrage and seeing how much Mystic Mine has dominated, winning a YCS, and the Exorcister deck that won Niagara Falls won specifically because of Mine and Dimension Shifter for the most part, at least in the finals, meaning it's going to be on Konami's radar. I think there's a chance they hit this, but I'm not sure. I don't think a limit would really do much. I think banning it or leaving it where it is really the only options that they have. I would much rather have Max C and have Mine banned. Personally, I think Max C is easier to play around, and you don't have to necessarily dedicate a significant amount of deck space to Max C. 4 cards you wouldn't be playing already. Things like Crossout and Ash will counter it, and those are obviously popular format cards. Will this be the time they finally hit Mine? I don't know. I hope so. I know some people are going to disagree, but we'll have to see what they decide. Artifact Scythe is another one that's been on the discussion radar for a couple ban lists now. This card, pretty generic with things like Dagda. It was obviously even easier to make when Destiny Hero Destroy Phoenix Enforcer was a, really powerful card that could be abused in everything with Predaplant, Verte, Anaconda. Obviously, Anaconda's banned, Fusion Destiny semi-limited, Destiny Hero Destroy Phoenix Enforcer doesn't see as much play right now, but Scythe is still a really problematic card that can completely shut down the opponent's ability to play, and while you have some people who would argue that it's not a huge problem and that that's just the way the modern game is, I'm definitely on the side of wanting things to be a lot more balanced, and I may be in the minority there, but I think Scythe as a whole is the one to hit. People have said hit Dagda, and you can, but truth be told, Scythe has been around for a long time and has definitely been problematic. If you get rid of Scythe, you get rid of the Scythe lock as a whole. If you get rid of Dagda, people may just find other ways to splash Scythe in. So I say just kind of cut the Viper off at the head. Artifact Scythe is one I could definitely see them hitting, although I do feel better about Mystic Mine being the one to get hit than Scythe if we're just talking possible move. Next up, we've got El Shadal Winda. This one has been a hot button issue for a while, and right now I would say people are actually a little bit less outraged about this card, but Tier Element Shadal is definitely a thing. Winda is a pretty oppressive card as a whole that can restrict special summoning, and the biggest problem with it, of course, has been with trap cards like Shadal Schism. You can splash a Winda package into something very easily without having to devote a significant amount of deck space to it. Back in the day, you had cards like Brilliant Fusion where you could just not Brilliant Fusion, Shadal Fusion, where you could just throw it in, with Shadals, and you had to actually kind of invest the effort and resources into getting this out. Yes, it can be countered, but it's also very restrictive, and with decks like Tier Elements being able to fusion summon with ease and even turning that into pluses, Winda may be one worth looking at. I have to admit I'm less confident about this one than any of the other projections, but it's still worth a mention because it is definitely a possible hit and something that could sort of do a little bit of damage to those fusion-based decks. This card was seeing play in Invoke Shadal, it sees play in Tier Element builds, it's going to see play forever because of just how good it is. It's hard to power creep this card because of its restrictive abilities on the opponent, but it's sort of weaker-ish in terms of, it's only a 2200 attack monster that doesn't have any protections from battle. It's not impossibly hard to get over, but usually it's accompanied by other things, and that's where the big problems sort of come in for this card. Now, Last up is Fairy Tale Snow. This card came back a couple formats ago, and I definitely lauded them for the decision. I do think it was a really cool card to see come back, and for a little while wasn't seeing much play at all, but that has certainly changed now. This card is absolutely nuts in Terra Elements, and it has just started to see a significant amount of play, not only there, but in other decks as well, as just a Swiss Army knife type card that can do so many things. But when you start to combine it with things that are just inherently busted, where the cost of this card actually turns into a plus and you're able to do all sorts of things like you could in Thunder Dragon back in the day, it's definitely something to think about. And it is not a hard once per turn, meaning there are not that many restrictions on how often you can bring this back and just continue to generate free resources depending on the deck you're playing. I think it's possible that this card could end up getting put back on the list, but it's also possible that they elect to keep it. I don't necessarily think that it's the main thing to hit for Tier Elements or any deck, really. I just think it's definitely possible. I mean, this did get an OTS 19 common reprint, so it's a bit more accessible, but it's not like that was a huge thing. Maybe they'll wait, and maybe they'll hit something else and see what type of changes they make, but Snow feels like a card that could very easily go in the wrong direction, whereas sometimes you see cards come off the list and they get put back to multiples. This could very easily be one they pop back on the ban list. We'll have to wait and see whether or not that happens, but I'm more confident, I think, about Mystic Mine and Artifact Scythe than anything. We will have to see whether or not any of these bans come to fruition, but I'd like to think at least one of the four has a good chance. Moving on to limited cards that I think are going to go to 1 in this format, and admittedly it is a relatively small list, but we're starting off with Blaster, Dragon Ruler, Urban Infernos. I have been talking about the Dragon Rulers for a long time. I think all of them sans Redox could come back without question. I think you could even make the argument for Redox, although it's a little bit more nuanced because there's a lot of Earth monsters that are just very easily abusable, but Blaster certainly has been power crept to the point where he has niche uses, but is not going to dominate anything. I think Tidal is really good too, but I know there's a lot of good water support that is not only coming out, but is already out, and I think the Atlantean structure deck is probably going to be on the horizon pretty soon for an upgrade like they've done with some of these past decks, so maybe they're going to be a little bit more hesitant on Tidal. Even Sprite could probably find ways to utilize that with a heavy water engine, so maybe they wait, maybe they move Blaster first. But we got Tempest back a couple of years ago, and they haven't done anything with the others, and I think it's about time we really take a chance on Blaster, because I don't think he's really going to be all that problematic. Brilliant Fusion is one I'm definitely intrigued by. With new Gem Knight support coming out pretty soon, it wouldn't shock me to see this card come to 1. I'd argue it's still very powerful, and putting it to 3 would be extremely risky. And to be honest with you, I'm not super sure how I feel about it coming off the list at all. But with Verte Anaconda not being a thing, allowing generic fusions to be played, and I think this card's actually not even a Verte target due to being continuous, so that's not really relevant to this conversation. Fusion stuff is definitely searchable, and there are ways to get to it, but putting it to 1, does allow some hype for the Gem Knight stuff, as we've seen Konami do time and time again, peeling things off the list to promote future product. We saw it with E-Telly. We've seen it with countless other cards where it's like, oh, this archetype's getting support, let's give them back a card and see what happens. So I think Brilliant Fusion is definitely a real candidate for a 1 back on the list. I don't think it would go any further than that, but we'll have to see whether or not that's a move they decide to make. Next up, we've got Emergency Teleport, which is a card that I think is extremely powerful, but has fallen out of favor a little bit in the short term in favor of the shiny new toys like Sprite and Tier Elements. But let's not forget, this card was extremely good in Punk not even that long ago, part of the Adventurer package. It's always going to be really good, and it does enable Halky Fibrax combos. I don't think they're going to ban Halk, which is why I think the more likely move would be to move E-Telly up. It's definitely a good card. I don't think it's ban-worthy in any capacity, referring to E-Telly, and it isn't seeing more play right now than some other more pressing things, but there are always those random limits that don't really play into whatever the most dominant thing in the format is, but they're thinking preemptively for other releases. It wouldn't shock me for E-Telly to be put to 1 or to 2, but I think maybe they do this as a move to sort of slap the Punk engine on the wrist if they don't end up hitting some of the Adventurer stuff. I could see E-Telly going back to 1, although it's not a move I think is necessary to make. But again, I mean, throwing out a decent number of predictions here, just trying to cover what Konami might do, is really the intent of this video. Now, that's it for my limited section. We're going to jump right into the semi-limited section, which has seen some more action in recent years, or lists, if you will, where Konami seems to be using it as a way to move cards off the list or to look at cards that are problematic. And we saw it in the past with cards like Nadir Servant. We saw Skullcrobat Joker come back to 1, then to 2, then to 3. Like, it happens where cards just slowly peel off or slowly go on. Desires, got put to 1 and then back to 2. basically, you get where I'm going with this. They kind of use this as a testing ground to make some moves. So Dimension Shifter is a card that has been making a lot of waves lately. It is a really, really powerful hand trap, and of course does have the drawback of drawing it late game in most decks means it's utterly useless, but it can absolutely change a game on its own, as we saw in YCS in YCS Niagara, among other occurrences. Dimension Shifter is a super powerful card. It was hit in the OCG. I could very easily see this going to 2 here to sort of slow down the likelihood of opening it, because you go from 3 copies to 2. That is a significant drop in the consistency, and it does make it a slight bit less likely that you're going to open it up. This card is dominating. It is making waves, and no matter what, I don't think it's going to get hit any more than 2 if it does get hit at all. This card is one you want to have on your radar if you don't have them already, because it is probably one of the best hand traps going into the upcoming format, whatever that may be, especially with how good of a matchup it has against Tier Element, and that's, you know, including the Ishizu stuff, which we don't even have yet. So I'm pretty confident that Dimension Shifter will be really good. I'm not 100% sure whether or not they hit it, but we will see what happens. As I've said before, I have Swap Frog on here to 2, given the fact that they did hit it in the OCG. And I don't think they want to hit any Sprite stuff here yet. It seems way too soon. Swap Frog to 2 could be a slap on the wrist. It leaves the deck playable. It doesn't do anything drastic, but it slightly neuters the consistency of the engine. I can't think of another hit that would make more sense unless they were going to hit one of the Sprite cards, but it doesn't seem like Sprite has done enough to really warrant that yet. It's popular, people like it, it's seeing regional tops, but it's not winning YCS, it's not making a ton of top cuts in the same vein that Tier is, and that even some of the adventure stuff, punk stuff is, in some more high-profile events. So I could see Swap Frog to 2. Again, low confidence on this move, but I definitely think it's a possibility, and it would be a little bit of a slap on the wrist to say, hey, we're paying attention to Sprite, you know, we still want to move product and move Sprite, but we're gonna hit that deck a little bit just to keep it in check going forward. Next up, Time Seal. This is basically just going to peel off. I think it's seen no play at 1. I guess it's a little better at 2 because of Trap Trick, meaning you can technically pull off some cheeky combos. But more often than not, Time Seal is not going to do much to win you the game. It's just going to sort of be an annoyance to the opponent. And depending on how the game states go and how slow this can be, I fully think we get this card back to 3, and I think it goes into the realm of forgotten cards unless someone's playing like Chain Burn or something. But this card, you know, you can't use it during your opponent's like draw phase to skip. It skips the draw phase of their next turn, so obviously if you set this, Trap Trick does make it a little bit better, but I see no reason why that would stop this. This is going to peel back, I think, and it'll probably end up at 3 after they test it out at 2. Not a ton of discussion to be had on this one. Next up, Water Enchanters of the Temple. I did talk about how Adventure hasn't really done as much, but is definitely still a popular engine. The cards are at their lowest prices now that they have been in some time, and obviously there are plenty of opportunities for them to come back in the future, and it's still very much floating around. It's a competitive engine. I just think people are sort of looking at other options, but it wouldn't shock me to see a hit at this point. I don't think they're going to make any significant hits because they haven't reprinted these cards, so they haven't done anything to like maximize the value, and whether or not you want to argue that that's a good way to do ban lists, it's typically the way Konami does business. So Water Enchanters could technically get another reprint at another date, sell another product. It got the ulti, but I don't really count ultis as a significant reprint because it's a very limited amount of people that are able to actually get those. So you have this, you have Rite of Baron Messir. You could limit Water Enchanters to 2, which is good, and some decks opt to only play 2 copies. I think Water Enchanters is sort of the lesser of the 2 hits, but it's still a hit that does a little something to Adventure while keeping the deck, you know, around, and just follows Konami's typical trend of like slap on the wrist for something as long as it's not dominating. All right, so that's going to wrap up the semi-limited section of the list. Pretty straightforward stuff here. I don't think I've really kind of touched on anything crazy. One of the big things, though, unlimited section is definitely on the bigger side compared to some of the other topics here. I'll go through them pretty quick. Pot of Desires, I think they moved it back to 2. I think they should just move it back to 3. There's no reason. This shouldn't have gotten hit in the first place. Pot of Prosperity is better. Desires is a bit of a niche card. Maybe they just didn't like that it was seeing so much representation, but I think this comes back without a question. Fusion Destiny, now that Verte's banned, there's no reason for this to be at 2 anymore. Let's peel it off and get, you know, I guess heroes get a little bit of a buff from it. Maybe Sky Striker will still play this, but I think it's just more or less kind of taking up space. It doesn't need to. On the list, Salamangreat Gazelle. Salad's fine. It's not doing too much, but people probably deserve this back. It came to 2. Hasn't done much. Peel it off to 3. It's fine. Nothing crazy there. And Nadir Servant has been at 2 for a bit. I think it's a really good card. But I mean, I think it's outclassed in the majority of things, especially with Ultimate Slayer existing as a card that can sort of do similar things, and in some cases better, because it doesn't have that same restriction that Nadir Servant does. But Nadir Servant is still a really solid card. It was limited at semi at a time that Invoked, Dogmatica, whatever was really dominating. There's really no reason now for this to still be on the list, so I'd like to see them peel that back. And that brings us to the end of this section. So, the final section I just kind of wanted to throw out there quickly is a dark horse kind of candidates. Cards I think would be kind of interesting to see, almost like Change of Heart was, but things I can't reasonably look at and expect, and that is this section here. So I've got 3 cards. Cyberjar is one I've talked about on previous ban lists. You either are in favor of this because it's slow, or you're against it because you think like Empty Jar FTK is going to become a thing. Cyberjar definitely generates a lot of resources, but I think people are scared of the effect on paper versus what it is in practice. It's definitely a really solid card. It's been banned for many, many years. It would be awesome to see it come back from a sort of like, let's get some stuff off the ban list, see how it does. Change of Heart came back, it doesn't see much play at all. Yada came back, it doesn't see much play at all. Realistically, I don't think Cyberjar is super problematic. It's just slow, and maybe there are some decks that could utilize it, things like Runic, and I'm not disregarding that, but I don't think they would opt to really utilize this as much as they could. You're looking at sort of trivial FTK decks, and I'd argue that the real problem cards are some of the cards that don't actually do anything. Cyberjar has a lot going for it. I think it'd be fun. I don't know if it's going to happen. It feels like a bit of a risky move from Konami's point of view, but who knows. Spellbook of Judgment is one that for a very long time I was against, but I've kind of come around to it. I've seen gameplay of people testing this out with modern format, and it just isn't nearly as powerful as it used to be. While it does give you resources, it doesn't end on the kind of scary board that it could back in the day. Making a Jowgen going against Dragon Rulers was super oppressive because you basically could just stop your opponent from playing. I think Spellbook of Judgment now would be cute, but I don't think it's going to do anything drastic at all. This is one that's been in discussion for a while. You can clearly see people anticipating it with the price starting to go up a little bit over time. It would not shock me to see this one peel off, but still, it's a hugely significant card. If you played during that time period, you'll remember how powerful this card really was. It was once regarded as one of the best spell cards ever made. It's kind of not evolved as effectively with the game, but it's still neat, and it would still be cool to see it come back and what people could do. And of course, I'd be remiss to not mention Masterpiece. I'm not really in favor of this one. I find True Draco to be oppressively unfun to play, but it wouldn't necessarily be the most groundbreaking thing if this did come off. It would be good. It would boost True Draco immediately, but without Diagram and Demise at 3, it's not like the deck is operating at full power. And really, the people that just keep buying this card out every ban list speculation season deserve maybe a win at some point in their investments. So Masterpiece, again, I feel like Spellbook of Judgment has the best shot of these 3 Dark Horse picks to really come back, if any, but it wouldn't shock me to see all 3 of them stay there. And who knows, I could be way off base on this list. They could make all kinds of hits we're not even considering. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. There was a lot to go through here. Hopefully you did enjoy. I know that like not everyone's going to agree with the takes. I just do these for fun. It's just sort of cool to put the predictions out there and see. I have played this game through a lot of ban lists, and I've learned that oftentimes whatever you think is going to happen, typically the opposite does. So we'll see what happens here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what moves you think they're going to make and other moves you might like to see, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.